The chandeliers inside the Plaza Hotel glittered above Manhattan's most powerful guests as billionaire CEO Caleb Morgan raised his champagne glass to celebrate the partnership that would expand his empire. Cameras flashed across the ballroom. Investors applauded. At Caleb's side stood Sienna Brooks, his younger mistress, wearing a silver gown and the confident smile of a woman certain she had already replaced his wife. Caleb's hand rested possessively on her waist. Then the ballroom doors opened. Grace Miller stood at the entrance, 6 months pregnant, one hand pressed protectively over her belly. Hours earlier, Caleb had forbidden her from attending. "You'll only ruin the mood," he had said before leaving their penthouse without looking back. Yet Grace had come anyway. This was the hotel where her husband was celebrating a business empire she had quietly helped build. These were the investors who praised Caleb without knowing how many contracts Grace had reviewed, how many crises she had prevented, or how much of the company legally belonged to her. Caleb finally noticed her. His smile faltered for only a second before he whispered into Sienna's ear. The mistress turned toward Grace and laughed, certain the pregnant wife had arrived to beg for her marriage. Grace felt every eye in the room move toward her, but she did not break. That morning, she had entered a private office and signed one final contract, while attorney Elias Carter watched in stunned silence. She had not come to fight Caleb for his love. She had come to announce that she now controlled the partnership he was celebrating, and that by midnight, his billionaire empire would no longer belong to him. She wasn't here to plead. She was here because everything Caleb thought belonged to him didn't anymore. Across the ballroom, Caleb raised his glass again, this time directly at her. A silent mockery, an unspoken dare. The crowd followed his gaze, their murmurs rising, and in that charged instant, Grace took her first step forward. The night Caleb believed he had won was about to become the night he lost everything, because he still didn't know what she had done. Grace Miller had always lived quietly, the kind of woman who made the world steadier without asking for applause. Long before the glittering ballrooms, company galas, and headlines that bore her husband's name, she was the girl who grew up in a modest Cleveland neighborhood, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a hospital. Grace learned early how to survive storms without making noise, how to stay calm, how to listen, and how to build a life brick by brick. She earned a scholarship to study finance at Columbia University, working evenings at a small bookstore while dissecting balance sheets and market models on her second-hand MacBook Air. She was brilliant, but more than that, she was consistent, patient, and quietly ambitious. Never flashy, never loud, just steady. That was exactly what drew Caleb Morgan to her. He had been the rising star of Morgan Tech. Arrogant, magnetic, a man made of sharp edges and sharper instincts. When he looked at Grace, he didn't see the humble girl from Cleveland. He saw the calm he lacked. She steadied him, balanced him, believed in him with a loyalty he thought he deserved. In the early years, they were inseparable. He'd pick her up after night classes in his used Mercedes sedan, laughing about the future they'd build once he took over the world. Grace believed him. It wasn't hard. He had that kind of electricity. When they married 5 years later, people said she was lucky. But the truth was, Caleb was the lucky one. Grace became the unseen engine behind Morgan Tech's explosive success. She analyzed contracts he didn't have time to read, caught financial inconsistencies before auditors did, and built long-term projections that saved the company millions. She never asked for credit. She only asked for honesty, partnership, and the family they had always talked about. That family came finally 6 months ago. Grace remembered the moment she told him she was pregnant. He had lifted her off the floor, spinning her in their Manhattan penthouse, while the city lights glittered below like a sea of possibilities. He promised he'd slow down, be present, build a future for all three of them. But promises are only as good as the man making them. Slowly, quietly, Caleb changed. Meetings late at night, trips he couldn't talk about yet, perfume that wasn't hers, excuses polished enough to sound real. Grace didn't want to believe any of it. She tried to blame hormones, stress, the pressure of the company's upcoming expansion. But lies always have a way of revealing themselves. She found the hotel receipts, the messages, the shift in the way he looked at her like she was an obligation instead of the woman who built his empire beside him. Still, she stayed calm. Still, she protected the baby. Still, she waited for the right moment. Because Grace, unlike Caleb, understood timing. The breaking point arrived the night he told her not to come to the gala. "You'll slow everything down," he said without looking up from his phone. "You should rest. Stay home. That was when she realized something important. He didn't just betray her, he underestimated her. And when a man underestimates a woman who knows his company's entire financial skeleton, he is preparing his own downfall. That night, Grace didn't cry. She opened the old corporate charter Morgan Tech had been founded on and found the clause that would change everything. But Caleb would learn the truth in the most public way possible. New York had a way of swallowing people whole, chewing them up with its blinding lights, its towering ambition, and its relentless pace. But tonight, the city felt sharper than usual, as if it were holding its breath for the storm about to break. Snow dusted the sidewalks outside the Plaza Hotel, settling like powdered sugar on the black coats of doormen ushering guests into the grand entrance. Limousines lined Fifth Avenue, headlights gleaming against the polished marble of the iconic facade. Inside, the grand ballroom shimmered with excess. Crystal chandeliers floated overhead like frozen constellations. Tables draped in ivory linens formed perfect rows, each set with fine silverware and sparkling glassware that caught every glint of golden light. The sound of clinking champagne flutes and polished laughter rolled through the space like a rehearsed symphony. This wasn't just an event, it was a declaration of wealth, a place only the boldest, richest, and most connected dared to enter. Tonight's spotlight belonged to Morgan Tech. Investors, board members, and city officials packed the room, eager for the announcement Caleb Morgan had teased for weeks. Rumors buzzed like electricity, new partnerships, new expansions, new authority. And Caleb, with his meticulously crafted image, made sure every detail reflected his dominance. Even the stage's backdrop, a towering digital display of the Manhattan skyline, seemed to echo Caleb's belief that the city belonged to him. Grace knew this world well, too well. She stood near the edge of the ballroom, taking it all in. The waterfall-like drapery, the soft hum of a string quartet, the faint scent of Dior perfume mingling with the aroma of truffle canapés served by waiters in crisp white gloves. She remembered the early years attending events like this beside Caleb, her hand tucked into his arm, her eyes full of pride each time someone toasted his brilliance. Back then, she believed they were a team, but now the gold felt colder, the chandeliers felt harsher. Everything that once looked grand now felt like a stage for betrayal. Grace touched her belly, grounding herself. The baby moved, a small reassurance in a room built on deception. She inhaled, feeling the dry warmth of the ballroom brush against her cheeks, and forced herself to look toward the stage area where Caleb and Sienna stood, surrounded by cameras. Caleb was soaking in attention like sunlight. His laugh carried across the room, loud, polished, practiced. Sienna leaned into him as if already draped in his last name. Grace swallowed hard. This used to be her world. Her husband, her company, her seat beside him. But tonight everything had shifted. When she'd stepped into the plaza earlier, she felt the weight of the building's history. A place where fortunes had been made, lost, reclaimed. A place where people performed versions of themselves for the world to applaud. And Grace, for the first time, wasn't performing. She wasn't pretending everything was okay. She wasn't hiding the truth. She was stepping into her role quietly, without fanfare, the way she always had. A waiter passed by her with a tray of sparkling water. Grace took a glass, the cool condensation dampening her fingertips. She scanned the room again, noticing how guests dressed in tailored suits and gowns drifted like planets around Caleb. And she realized something powerful. Caleb didn't just underestimate her. He underestimated the setting. The plaza wasn't just a venue, it was the perfect stage. Because soon, under its golden chandeliers and its unforgiving spotlight, secrets would shatter, alliances would crumble, and every eye would turn toward the woman Caleb cast aside. And Grace knew the moment was coming faster than anyone in that room expected. Caleb Morgan had always been a man who believed the world belonged to him. Power wasn't something he earned, it was something he expected. Even before Morgan Tech became a billion-dollar giant, Caleb carried himself like a man destined to own entire skylines. He spoke with the precision of someone who believed every sentence he delivered was important. He walked like no one had the right to stand in his way, and he loved attention the way other men loved oxygen. Tonight, he was in his element. Under the chandeliers of the plaza, he moved through the crowd with the confidence of a king surveying his kingdom. Investors clapped him on the back, reporters angled for photos, and board members circled him, hoping to catch a second of his time. Every compliment inflated him just a little more, feeding a hunger that had taken over long before he realized it. Caleb didn't just want success, he wanted worship, and Sienna Brooks knew exactly how to give it to him. She stood beside him in a silver dress that shimmered like liquid metal, her manicured hand resting lightly on his arm. She was 27, bold, sharp, and hungry for upward mobility. Sienna wasn't naive. She wasn't accidentally swept into an affair with a married CEO. She had seen the cracks in Caleb's marriage before he even admitted them. She knew how to make him feel young again, powerful, desired. She understood exactly which compliments inflated his ego and which tears softened his temper. To Caleb, she was excitement. To Sienna, he was a ladder. Her smile tonight was polished, rehearsed, calculated. She whispered into his ear between photo flashes, praising him, feeding him the validation he craved. And he ate every bit of it with the delusion that he was the one in control. Still, despite his swagger, something about tonight mattered more to Caleb than he wanted to admit. The announcement he was preparing to make, the expansion deal with an international tech conglomerate, was the biggest move of his career. A move that would cement him as a titan in the industry. A move that would make headlines across Wall Street. He had built his entire identity around being untouchable, invincible, irreplaceable, which was why the sight of Grace at the entrance, pregnant, poised, and unexpectedly radiant, had rattled something in him. Just for a second, he brushed it off quickly, tightening his grip around Sienna's waist. "Ignore her," he murmured, the words slipping out coated in irritation. She shouldn't even be here, but something about Grace's expression unsettled him. She wasn't crying, she wasn't accusing, she wasn't desperate. She looked certain, as if she knew something he didn't. Caleb hated not knowing things. Control was everything to him. And Grace, the quiet, predictable wife he believed would always bend for him, was suddenly unreadable. Sienna noticed. She leaned in, whispering, "She's just trying to make you uncomfortable. Don't let her. It's no brass." He forced a smile, raising his champagne glass toward another cluster of guests. But beneath the charm, a flicker of annoyance. No. Fear tightened his jaw. The deal tonight required flawless optics. If Grace caused a scene, it would ruin everything. But Grace didn't look like someone who came to cause a scene. She looked like someone who came to win. Caleb dismissed the thought, pulling Sienna closer and directing the photographer's attention back onto himself. Yet every so often, his eyes drifted to Grace as if instinct warned him of a shift in the air. Something was off. He could feel it, but he didn't know why. Not yet. And the moment he discovered the truth would be the moment the ground finally collapsed beneath him. Grace had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that blending into the ballroom would give her a few moments of peace before the night spiraled. But peace was a luxury in a world built on power, ego, and spectacle. Especially when your husband was the kind of man who preferred his victories loud and his cruelties louder. It began subtle, a few glances, a few whispers. Then, a familiar sharp laugh sliced through the music, the unmistakable chime of Sienna Brooks. Grace didn't want to look, but the room had already shifted toward the center table where Caleb and Sienna stood like royalty holding court. Caleb spotted Grace again. Something dark flickered across his face before he masked it with a smile, too bright to be genuine. "Grace," he called out, loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. "Didn't expect to see you tonight." The way he said it, sweetened with condescension, sharpened with ownership, made the hairs on her arms rise. Conversations around them slowed, eyes turned. Grace forced a calm breath and stepped forward, her heels tapping against marble like quiet declarations of presence. Caleb's lips curved. "Everyone, this is my wife, Grace Miller Morgan." The hesitation before wife, the subtle squeeze of Sienna's waist, the pointed emphasis on his last name, every detail was ammunition. Sienna tilted her head with a smile engineered to wound. "Grace, sweetheart, you made it. I told Caleb you might feel overwhelmed tonight. Big events can be a lot, when you're so far along." The implication hung in the air. Vulnerable, fragile, out of place. Grace felt her chest tighten, but she didn't flinch. "I'm fine," she said evenly. "Thank you," Caleb chuckled, swirling his champagne. "You should have stayed home. All this stress isn't good for you." He gestured broadly, as if the glittering ballroom was an environment too sophisticated for someone like her. "Besides, the announcement tonight is for the next chapter of Morgan Tech. It doesn't really concern you." A few guests exchanged awkward glances. They knew Grace had once been deeply involved in the company. Some even knew she had saved it from near disaster years ago. But Caleb continued, eyes bright with mischief. Actually, he said, gesturing to Sienna. Sienna here has been a huge help preparing tonight's presentation. Amazing energy, fresh ideas. Sienna squeezed his arm. Caleb exaggerates, but she didn't deny it. Grace felt heat rise under her skin. Not from jealousy, those ashes had burned out long ago, but from insult, from erasure. Caleb wasn't just replacing her privately. He was doing it publicly, shamelessly, in a room full of witnesses. And he wasn't finished. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice, but ensuring enough people heard. Really, Grace, you shouldn't push yourself tonight. You look tired. Maybe find a seat in the back? We wouldn't want anything dramatic. A soft wave of laughter rippled through the group. Not cruel. Worse. Pitying. Grace stood very still. The baby shifted gently, as if sensing her unraveling. She steadied herself. I'm not here to cause a scene, she said calmly. Sienna raised a brow. That's good. We wouldn't want the media mistaking you for part of the leadership circle. The jab landed clean. A few gasps. Someone murmured. That was unnecessary. But Sienna only smiled wider. Caleb leaned in, voice dripping with patronizing contempt. Just relax, Grace. Enjoy the show. Tonight is a big moment for us. Us? Him and his mistress, not his wife. Grace's throat tightened, but her eyes did not water. Not tonight. Not here. She swallowed once, lifted her chin, and said quietly, Yes, Caleb. Tonight will be a big moment. He smirked, assuming victory. He had had idea. Because the show he was bragging about was moments away from becoming his downfall, and she was the one holding the match. Grace didn't remember how she got out of the circle of people who had witnessed her humiliation. One moment, she was standing under the brutal glow of the chandeliers, and the next, she was slipping through the side doors of the ballroom. Her breath shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. The hallway outside the plaza's grand ballroom was much quieter. Soft lighting, thick carpet that muted her footsteps. The distant hum of music felt almost mocking. She leaned against the wall, one hand clutching her belly, the other gripping the edge of a marble column to keep herself upright. Her lungs trembled, her vision blurred, her chest felt tight, like someone was pressing down with both hands. She had prepared for this. She had told herself she was ready, that no insult, no whisper, no public spectacle could shake her now, not after everything she'd discovered inside. But knowing it and experiencing it were two different worlds entirely. Caleb's voice replayed in her head. You shouldn't even be here. You look tired. It doesn't concern you. Every word carved deeper, reopening wounds she thought she had already bandaged. She swallowed hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. A server walked past carrying a tray of champagne. He paused, concern flickering in his expression. Ma'am, do you need help? Grace managed a small smile. I'm okay, really. But she wasn't okay, not even close. Her whole body felt heavier than it should, as if grief itself had weight. She slid onto a nearby velvet bench, exhaling shakily. Her baby shifted gently inside her, and for a moment, that tiny movement broke her. A tear slid down her cheek, then another, until she could no longer stop them. She didn't sob, she didn't wail. Grace had never been the dramatic type, but silent tears, those were harder to contain because this wasn't just heartbreak. This was betrayal, layered on humiliation, layered on exhaustion, layered on months of feeling invisible in her own marriage. She pressed a hand against her stomach. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry you had to hear all that. She thought she had hit her limit. She had endured enough pain for one night, but then she heard familiar laughter drifting down the hall. Caleb's, followed closely by Sienna's. Grace stiffened. The footsteps came closer, the smug rhythm of heels and expensive shoes echoing through the corridor. Grace wiped her cheeks quickly, forcing herself upright. Caleb rounded the corner first, still holding a champagne flute. His tie loosened and his confidence unwavering. Sienna clung to his arm, her smile feline, victorious. There you are, Caleb said lightly, as though they were a normal married couple who simply got separated during a party. You didn't run off because of what I said, did you? Grace, come on. You're too emotional lately. Too emotional. Too dramatic. Too much. It was always too much, unless it benefited him. Sienna tilted her head. We were just talking about the announcement, she said sweetly. You'll want to hear this, Grace. It's well. It's big. Caleb smirked, fueled by champagne and arrogance. You'll find out soon enough, but trust me, it's for the best. For everyone. I know. He tapped her shoulder like she was a child. A gesture so dismissive, Grace felt her stomach drop. Something inside her cracked. Not broken, not defeated. Different. A shift. Like a quiet storm forming at the center of her chest. She looked at Caleb, really looked at him. And for the first time, she didn't see the man she married. She saw a stranger. A reckless man sprinting toward the edge of a cliff he didn't even know existed. And she realized something. Her breakdown wasn't the end of her strength. It was the beginning of it. Because when she stood back up, she would not be the same woman he tried to humiliate. Grace wiped her face slowly, breathing through the last tremors of her breakdown. When she stood again, she felt strangely steadier, as if the tears had rinsed away something heavy enough to let clarity return. Her heartbeat found its rhythm, and the air that once felt sharp now felt purposeful. The moment Caleb and Sienna's footsteps faded, Grace reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. A single message from Elias Carter sat on the screen. All documents cleared. Activation timestamp recorded. Step 2 begins when you decide. Her pulse thudded. Step 2. She had known tonight would come with challenges, but she hadn't expected the weight of humiliation to hit this hard. Still, the sight of Caleb gloating, dismissive, certain he controlled everything, made her grip the phone tighter. He had no idea what she had signed. No idea what she had activated. No idea that the empire he flaunted was no longer legally his. When she had walked into Elias's office earlier that day, her hands trembling from another lonely morning in the penthouse, she hadn't been sure whether she was strong enough to go through with it. But the contract, the original Morgan Tech charter from the early years, was right there in black and white. A clause buried under decades of amendments. In the event the CEO demonstrates actions of moral misconduct during the spouse's pregnancy, all voting power and majority holding transfer to the spouse until the child's safe delivery. It sounded archaic, almost absurd. A relic from the company founder's obsession with family integrity, but it was legally binding. Caleb had never removed it. He didn't even know it existed. He had built an empire on arrogance, and arrogance made him sloppy. Elias had walked her through every page, every signature line. You understand? He said carefully. That activating this clause gives you controlling interest. 51%. No board vote can override it. Grace had nodded. Her hands had trembled, but her voice was steady. I'm ready. We have the more to do, see. And now, in the dim golden light of the plaza's hallway, she felt the weight of that readiness return. She stared at the ballroom doors. Behind them, Caleb was minutes away from announcing the largest partnership in Morgan Tech history, a deal that would fail instantly once the documents she signed took effect. He was bragging, boasting, celebrating his future, a future he no longer owned. Grace slipped her phone back into her clutch. The baby shifted, as if sensing the change in her posture, the shift in her energy. She smoothed her dress and walked toward the ballroom doors, not with panic, not with fear, but with purpose. Just before re-entering the ballroom, she caught her reflection in one of the mirrored panels. Her eyes were puffy, yes. Her cheeks were flushed. But there was something else, too. Resolve. She no longer looked like a woman breaking. She looked like a woman rising. Inside, applause roared as Caleb took the stage, spotlight spilling over him like a crown. He adjusted the microphone, confidence radiating from him like heat. Sienna stood proudly beside him, ready to bask in the glow of his success. Grace stepped deeper into the ballroom. The lights, the cameras, the whispers, all of it washed over her. Caleb tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight marks the beginning of a new era. Grace stopped walking because Elias had just entered through the back doors, holding a sleek black folder. His expression was calm, but urgent. Their eyes met. He nodded once. It was time. Grace turned back toward the stage, her breath steady, her chin lifted. And at that exact moment, Caleb noticed Elias and the confident, unshaken way Grace began walking straight toward them. Grace had always been the quiet one in any room, unseen, underestimated, the supportive shadow beside a man who demanded all the light. But as she re-entered the ballroom, something in the air shifted. It wasn't dramatic or flashy. It was subtle, a soft tightening in the atmosphere, like the pause before a storm that no one knew was coming. She walked with a steadiness she hadn't possessed 30 minutes ago. Her posture straightened, her chin lifted. The humiliation she had endured earlier no longer clung to her. Instead, it had crystallized into something sharper, cleaner, resolve. Her dress, a simple navy gown that once made her feel invisible, now felt like armor. The understated jewelry she wore, gifts from years when Caleb still pretended to love her, glimmered under the chandeliers like quiet symbols of a past she was finally ending. Even her steps sounded different, as though each click of her heel was a declaration that she was no longer playing small. And people noticed. Eyes followed her first out of curiosity, then confusion, then something like recognition. "That's the wife," someone whispered. "She looks different, stronger." Grace didn't seek their validation. Her mind was focused, clear. Every step she took toward the stage was fueled by the simple truth. She was the majority owner of Morgan Tech now, legally, permanently, irrevocably. All she had to do was claim it. Elias Carter caught up to her halfway across the ballroom. His expression was composed, but there was an unmistakable urgency in his tone. "Everything is official. Once you take the stage, public acknowledgement triggers the clause fully." Grace nodded. No fear, no trembling. "Are you sure you're ready?" he asked quietly. She met his eyes, eyes that showed respect, not pity. "I've never been more ready for anything." She meant it, because something had changed in her. The timidness that once defined her was gone, replaced by a quiet, commanding presence. She wasn't a wounded wife anymore. She wasn't even a victim. She was a woman reclaiming everything she'd built, everything she'd earned, everything that had been taken from her. When she reached the foot of the stage, the energy of the room shifted again. Phones lowered, conversations stalled. Even the string quartet's soft melody seemed to dim. Caleb was mid-sentence, basking in applause, when he noticed her. His voice faltered barely, but enough for the crowd to sense the disturbance. "Grace?" His brow furrowed. "What are you doing?" Grace didn't answer immediately. She stepped up onto the stage with a deliberate grace, her hand steady as she touched the railing. The baby kicked gently, as if offering reassurance. She stepped beside Caleb, not behind him, not beneath him, beside him. To the audience, it looked like a wife finally confronting her husband. To Grace, it was the moment she stepped into her rightful power. Sienna's smile snapped instantly, like a mask cracking down the middle. She gripped her clutch so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Caleb," Grace said softly, but her voice carried through the speakers with surprising strength. "Before you continue your announcement, I have something to say." A hush fell. Caleb forced a laugh. "Grace, sweetheart, this isn't really the time." Grace raised a hand, silencing him. A simple motion, but powerful enough to make the entire ballroom exhale as one. Her transformation was complete. She didn't need makeup or a new dress or a dramatic reveal. Power looked good on her because it was finally hers. Elias stepped forward from the audience, holding the black folder that contained the truth Caleb had ignored for months. Grace took one breath, calm, measured, and then she reached for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "there's something you all need to know before my husband continues." Grace's fingers wrapped around the microphone with a steady that rivaled the chandeliers above her. The room was frozen, suspended between breath and disbelief. Caleb forced a smile, the kind he used in interviews when cornered, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Grace," he murmured through clenched teeth, "you're embarrassing yourself. $2. But Grace didn't even look at him. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice soft but amplified across the vast ballroom. "Before Caleb announces the future of Morgan Tech, you deserve to know the truth about its present." A ripple moved through the crowd. Elias stepped closer to the stage, placing the sleek black folder on the podium. Grace opened it with deliberate calm, revealing the stamped documents that glinted under the lights. Caleb's face drained of color. "This," Grace continued, "is a legally binding activation of a clause written into Morgan Tech's founding charter, a clause my husband forgot existed." Sienna blinked, confusion turning into unease. She leaned toward Caleb. "What clause, Caleb? What is she talking about?" Caleb didn't answer. Sweat gathered at his temple. Grace lifted the document. The clause states that if the CEO engages in moral misconduct during his spouse's pregnancy, all voting power, assets, and controlling interest of Morgan Tech transfer to the spouse until the child's safe delivery. Gasps exploded through the ballroom. Every head turned toward Caleb, some shocked, some entertained, some vindicated. Grace continued, her voice unwavering. I activated this clause this morning. It is already in effect, legally, permanently, and without the possibility of reversal. Caleb lunged toward the mic. You can't. Grace stepped aside, leaving him to grab the air. I can. I did. Sienna's lips parted. Caleb, you said everything was handled. You said she had no power. The room erupted in murmurs. She owns the company now. Did he really cheat while she's pregnant? This is unbelievable. Serves him right. Grace wasn't finished. It's important you all know this before tonight's deal, she said calmly. Any contract Caleb signs from this point forward will be invalid. He no longer has the authority to represent Morgan Tech. Caleb snapped. You vindictive? Grace raised a hand, silencing him again. No, this isn't vindictive. This is responsibility. While you were busy showing off your mistress and pretending I didn't matter, I was protecting the company you were about to destroy. Elias nodded from below the stage. The clause is airtight, effective immediately. Board members exchanged panicked looks. Investors whispered aggressively. A few already pulled out their phones, sending instructions to halt pending transactions. Caleb tried again, desperation cracking through his voice. Grace, please, let's talk about this. She met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw nothing he could manipulate. No softness, no fear, only finality. You didn't talk to me, she said, when you hid your affair. You didn't talk to me when you decided I wasn't part of your future. So now, I'm not talking, I'm acting. The ballroom stood electrified. Sienna took a step back from Caleb, her expression draining into horror, as she realized what his downfall meant for her own future. Grace turned to the audience. From this moment on, I will oversee all executive decisions related to Morgan Tech. Anyone with pending discussions with Caleb will need to speak with me instead. Every one of a roar of reactions surged through the crowd. Shock, triumph, disbelief, satisfaction. Caleb staggered, gripping the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Grace, you're ruining me. She looked at him with calm, steady eyes. No, Caleb, you ruined yourself. Security had begun moving toward the stage, not for Grace, but for him. Whispers swelled. They're escorting him out. He's done. Today's or them. Did his wife seriously just? And before Caleb could react, the head of security approached with grave professionalism. Mr. Morgan, he said firmly, you need to step down. And as Caleb turned stunned, furious, unraveling the entire ballroom, watched the king lose his crown in real time. The ballroom doors hadn't even finished closing behind Caleb before the atmosphere shifted entirely. Moments ago, he had stood at the center of attention, his ego fed by admiration and applause. Now, he was a ghost of himself, escorted down the hallway by security as cameras captured every second of his downfall. His legacy, his pride, his power, all slipping through his fingers like sand. Inside, silence held the room together for one final suspended moment. Grace remained on stage, her hand still lightly touching the microphone, but she no longer looked like the woman who had walked into this event trembling with uncertainty. She stood taller, her shoulders squared, her presence commanding without needing to raise her voice. Her transformation wasn't loud, it was dignified, earned, and undeniable. Elias moved closer, stopping just at the foot of the stage. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched her with a calm respect that warmed her in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was steady, anchoring, sincere, the kind of presence she hadn't felt by her side in years. Grace inhaled slowly, then addressed the crowd one last time. I want to thank everyone for your patience, she said. Tonight was not the night any of us expected, but sometimes the truth arrives in ways that shake the ground so we can build something stronger. A few people nodded. Others murmured in agreement. Some even clapped. Grace continued, her voice steady. Morgan Tech will move forward with integrity and transparency. I will ensure that every decision from this point on reflects the values this company was founded on: stability, honesty, and responsibility. This time, applause grew gentle at first, then fuller, fueled by relief, curiosity, and admiration. Grace let it wash over her without letting it consume her. She wasn't here for applause. She was here to build a future for herself and her child. After stepping down from the stage, she walked through the crowd. People approached her board members, shaking her hand, investors offering support, even strangers congratulating her on her courage. Not once did she falter. When she finally exited the ballroom, Elias awaited her in the quiet corridor. "You handled yourself with remarkable composure," he said softly. Grace smiled, one that reached her eyes for the first time that night. "I didn't think I could. Not until it was happening." "You did more than handle it," Elias said. "You rewrote the entire direction of this company, and you protected your future." Grace gently placed a hand on her belly. "Our future," she corrected. For a moment, they stood in the warm hush of the hallway, the muffled sounds of the ballroom fading behind them. It felt like the end of a war, not joyful, but peaceful, resolute. Grace wasn't walking away with revenge. She was walking away with justice. As they stepped outside the plaza, snowflakes drifted around them, glowing under the city lights. Grace looked up at the skyline, her skyline now, and exhaled the weight she'd been carrying for so long. She had lost her marriage, but she had found herself, and she had secured a future far brighter than anything Caleb ever offered. Elias held the door open for her as a town car arrived, sent by the board. "Grace," he said gently, "this is only the beginning." But 8. She glanced back at the plaza, the place where everything collapsed and everything began. "No," she said softly. "This is the beginning of the right chapter." She stepped into the car, heart calm, future steady, and for the first time in a long time, Grace knew she had truly won. Caleb Morgan had always thought of himself as untouchable. Even as the security team escorted him out earlier, some part of him believed the nightmare was temporary, a misunderstanding he could fix, a problem he could charm his way through. He had built an entire identity on the illusion that consequences were for other people. But illusions don't survive daylight. By the time he stumbled out of the service hallway behind the plaza, the Manhattan night felt colder, sharper. Snow tapped against his suit jacket like tiny, icy reminders that the world around him had changed without his permission. His breathing turned ragged as he clutched his phone, scrolling frantically through emails, dozens of missed messages, legal alerts, board notifications, and the most devastating ones: "Your access has been suspended. Please direct all inquiries to Acting Chairwoman Grace Miller. Your credentials are no longer valid." He read each one twice, hands shaking. "No," he whispered, voice cracking. "No, this can't be happening." But it was. Just hours ago, he'd walked this same block with the swagger of a man who expected the future to bow at his feet. Now, he was a man stripped of title, authority, and the company he worshipped more than his own marriage. He tried calling Sienna. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. The third time, her voicemail clicked on immediately, a sign she had manually declined the call. Panic clawed through his chest. He spotted her through the glass doors of the plaza. She wasn't crying. She wasn't distressed. She was speaking with board members, laughing nervously, clearly trying to detach herself from him as quickly as possible. When she finally caught him watching, her expression hardened. Then she turned away. Just like that, gone. The woman he threw his marriage away for evaporated when his power did. Caleb's stomach twisted. He took a step toward the entrance, only for a guard to block him. "Sir, you're not allowed inside without authorization." Caleb's jaw clenched. "I'm the CEO." The guard didn't blink. Not anymore. The words struck like a physical blow. He stepped back, dazed, as the guard's radio crackled. More whispers, more movement, more people treating him like he didn't exist. He walked aimlessly down Fifth Avenue, past glittering holiday window displays that contrasted painfully with the ruin unraveling inside him. The world looked exactly the same, but his place in it had collapsed. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't Caleb Morgan, the man everyone chased. He was just a man who had finally run out of excuses. As he approached the corner of the block, his phone buzzed again. Not a call, not Sienna, not an apology or a lifeline. It was his lawyer. A single text. "We need to talk. There are further complications." Caleb stopped walking. The city blurred around him. Complications? His mind raced the hidden expenses he covered for Sienna, the misreporting he thought no one would notice, the personal transactions disguised within company expenses. things he always assumed he'd have time to fix, things he thought were buried. His heart pounded violently as another message followed. The financial audit Grace requested before her activation flagged several irregularities tied to your account. A wave of nausea hit him. No, she couldn't have. But she had. Grace hadn't just taken his company back. She had uncovered the secrets he prayed would stay hidden. His legs weakened. He grabbed a lamppost, the cold metal burning his palm. The married man he once was gone. The CEO he once was gone. The future he imagined gone. And Grace, she wasn't finished. Because the next consequence waiting for him wouldn't just ruin his career, it would threaten his freedom. The next morning, Manhattan looked unfamiliar. Not because the skyline had changed, but because Grace had. As she stepped out of the Blacktown car the board provided, the cold air felt sharper, clearer, almost cleansing. For years, she had walked into Morgan Tech headquarters as an accessory to her husband's legacy. Today, she walked in as the woman who owned that legacy. Glass doors slid open and employees froze. Some whispered. Some stared. Some hurried to adjust their posture. Everyone had seen the videos. The confrontation at the plaza had gone viral overnight. Clips of her exposing the claws were trending everywhere, from Wall Street Twitter to morning TV. The world didn't just know Grace Miller, they were rooting for her. She stepped into the lobby, her heels tapping against the marble floor with a confidence she didn't have yesterday. The receptionist who had once greeted her with polite indifference now stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her coffee. Mrs. Chairwoman Miller. Welcome. Grace offered a calm smile. Just Grace is fine. In the elevator, her reflection stared back at her, composed, steady, undeniably strong. She placed a hand on her belly. The baby kicked softly, like encouragement. On the top floor, members of the board were already waiting in the conference room, a room she once entered as a silent observer. Today, every chair faced her. Elias was there too, standing near the window overlooking Park Avenue. The morning light cast a warm glow over him. He nodded gently when she walked in, as if to say, "You earned this." Grace took her place at the head of the long glass table, a place Caleb never imagined she would sit. The board members shifted, clearing their throats. Harold Kingston, the senior board member, spoke first. "Grace, last night was extraordinary. We didn't know the clause existed." She opened the folder in front of her. Caleb didn't either. Soft laughter rippled around the table, but it wasn't mocking. It was relieved, released, almost grateful. Grace continued. Morgan Tech has suffered under Caleb's impulsive leadership for too long. His personal behavior was hurting the company long before last night. Financial irregularities have surfaced. Investor confidence has been dropping, Bree said. 4-7. 4-7. They nodded. Some ashamed they hadn't acted sooner. Grace placed her hands on the table, palms steady. This company deserves stability. It deserves integrity, and I intend to provide both. She laid out her plan, restructuring leadership roles, restoring transparency, pausing questionable expansions Caleb had pushed through without oversight. She recommended promoting teams Caleb had ignored for years. She emphasized rebuilding trust with employees. The board listened, impressed. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't dramatic. She was prepared, more prepared than Caleb ever was. And she finished. Effective immediately, we will begin a full audit of all CEO-related expenditures from the past 18 months. A quiet gasp. Someone murmured, "That will uncover everything." Grace didn't blink. "It needs to." Elias slid a document across the table. "I'll oversee the audit team myself." Relief swept through the room. They had not just found a leader, they had found a stabilizer. As the meeting ended, board members approached her one by one, thanking her, respecting her, seeing her. Grace let the feeling settle in her chest like warmth spreading through cold glass. When the room finally cleared, Elias stayed behind. "You did well," he said softly. Grace exhaled. "I didn't think I could." "You didn't just step up," he said. "You stepped forward." Her eyes softened. For the first time since the marriage began collapsing, she felt something like a hope. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. She opened it. A single sentence. "You don't know what you've started." Grace's breath caught because the next battle wasn't coming from Caleb, but from someone far more dangerous. The message lingered on Grace's phone like a shadow that refused to leave. You don't know what you've started. No name, no number, just a warning that cut through her newfound calm like ice water. Grace stared at it for several seconds, the hum of the empty conference room growing louder in her ears. She had expected pushback from Caleb, rage, panic, threats, even desperation. But this felt different, strategic, calculated, and far more dangerous. She turned the phone toward Elias. His expression hardened. This isn't from Caleb. Grace swallowed. Then who? Elias didn't look away from the screen. Someone who has something to lose now that you're in control. A chill crawled up her spine. For the first time since last night, the weight of what she'd done, taking over $1 billion company, publicly humiliating a CEO, triggering an audit that could expose major criminal liability, felt real. Not frightening, but real. And real meant enemies. Elias gently took the phone, examining the message. I'll have our cybersecurity team trace it. In the meantime, stay alert, has Malzing. Grace nodded, but inside her chest, unease pulsed like a second heartbeat. And that afternoon she toured the executive floor, her floor now. Employees paused, watching her with curiosity, admiration, and the kind of careful respect only a true leader earned. But one office remained closed, Caleb's. Grace stood in front of it, exhaling slowly. Memories flickered, late nights spent reviewing contracts together, arguments about his travel schedule, moments she once mistook for partnership, all illusions now shattered. She pushed the door open. The office smelled like his cologne, sharp, expensive, artificial. Papers were scattered across the desk in the exact chaotic manner he preferred. Sienna's lipstick-stained coffee cup still sat beside the keyboard. Grace's eyes narrowed. Then she saw it, a stack of unsigned contracts. Not for the expansion deal. Those had been prepared for the Gala. These were older, hidden. The headers read, International Development Agreement, Confidential, Private Capital Transfer Authorization, Asset Divestment Schedule, Restricted. Her stomach tightened. These weren't deals Caleb mentioned to the board. Elias followed her inside, his jaw tensing when he read the documents. Grace, these signatures, these are blank transfer sheets. Grace looked up sharply. Meaning? Meaning Caleb was preparing to sell parts of Morgan Tech quietly. Offshore accounts, private investors, deals the board never approved. Her pulse spiked. So he was planning to gut the company or cash out and disappear, Elias said. But he couldn't finalize without majority vote, which, until last night, was him. Grace felt a wave of nausea, not from fear, from disgust. How long had he been planning this? How long had she been living beside a man building an escape plan? How long had the company been at risk without anyone knowing? Before Elias could say more, Grace's phone buzzed again. She hesitated, then opened the new message. This one was worse. Caleb wasn't working alone. Her breath hitched. Attached was a photo. A man she recognized immediately, Victor Hale, an investor with a notorious reputation, known for hostile takeovers and crushing companies from the inside. Caleb had met with him months ago, but claimed it was nothing serious. Victor Hale never did nothing serious. Elias stared at the screen, color draining from his face. Grace, Victor Hale is one of the most ruthless men on Wall Street. If he was working with Caleb, he'll come after control of the company. Grace steadied herself. Let him come. Her voice didn't shake. Elias looked at her, surprised, impressed. She placed the phone down. I didn't fight my way here to hand anything over. He wants a war? He'll get one. But even as she spoke, another message appeared. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Phase 1 begins tonight. Grace exhaled sharply, because Caleb losing power was just the beginning. The real enemy had finally stepped out of the shadows. Grace always believed she understood how power worked in the corporate world quietly, strategically, behind closed doors. But Victor Hale was not the kind of man who hid in shadows. He preferred to step into a room and let the room bend around him. And that's exactly what happened. That evening, as the city lights blinked awake across Manhattan, Grace returned to her office after a round of department meetings. Plans were forming. Stability was returning. Employees were beginning to trust her. For the first time since the takeover, she felt a small surge of momentum until her assistant rushed in, breathless. Grace, sorry, Chairwoman Miller. There's a visitor waiting in the executive lobby. He refused to sign in. Who is it? Grace asked, Her assistant swallowed. Victor Hale. Grace froze. It didn't matter that she had prepared for this. It didn't matter that she'd expected a power play. Nothing could have fully prepared her for facing the man whose name alone could collapse companies. She straightened her blazer and walked toward the lobby. Victor Hale stood by the window, overlooking the glowing grid of Park Avenue, tall, impeccably dressed, a presence so sharp the air seemed to curve around him. His salt and pepper hair and tailored charcoal suit gave him an aura of cold sophistication. He didn't turn when she entered. Only when she stepped fully into the room did he speak. "So, you're the one who toppled the king." Grace's spine stiffened. "I protected a company he nearly destroyed." Victor turned finally, a faint, amused smile touching his lips. His eyes were ice-calculated, assessing, void of empathy. "Elias told me you were sharp," he said, "but he undersold you." Grace didn't flinch. "Why are you here, Mr. Hale?" He stepped closer, hands folded behind his back. "Let's skip the goodwill. You took something Caleb promised me." Grace's breath caught. "Promised?" Victor nodded once. "Caleb approached me 5 months ago. He wanted out, wanted to sell off key divisions of Morgan Tech. I agreed in exchange for majority influence over the restructuring." Grace's stomach twisted. He continued, voice calm and lethal. "We had an understanding. Your husband may have been foolish, but he wasn't useless. And now?" Grace asked. "Now," Victor said, his smile sharpening. "You've jeopardized years of planning." Grace held her ground. "The deals were illegal, unauthorized, dishonest." Victor's expression didn't change. "Business is never clean, Grace. You want to survive, you have to get dirty." She shook her head. "Morgan Tech isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." Victor chuckled a low, chilling sound. "That's adorable, truly. But you're in my way, and people in my way don't stay standing for long." Also, Grace's pulse quickened. "Is that a threat? It's a forecast." Victor slipped a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "You'll want to read this. Caleb gave me access to information that could make your leadership very difficult. And very short." Grace didn't move to pick it up. Victor stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You humiliated him last night. Do you think powerful men like Caleb lose quietly? He may be down, but he's not finished. And neither am I. Everyone." Grace forced a steady breath. "Whatever you think you can use against me, it won't work." Victor grinned. "Oh, Grace, you really don't know, do you? Caleb sold more than company assets. He gave me leverage over him and over you." He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "And the board will turn on you the moment I reveal it." Grace felt the floor shift beneath her. Victor stepped back, satisfied. "You have until tomorrow morning to step aside. Otherwise, everything Caleb hid will become your burden. And your scandal." He headed toward the elevator, pausing only to look at her one last time. "Enjoy your evening, chairwoman. It will be your last peaceful one." The doors closed, leaving Grace alone with the folder. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Inside was the secret that could destroy everything she had just begun to rebuild. Grace stood alone in her office, staring at the folder Victor had left behind. The city glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, 1,000 lights blinking like restless eyes watching her every move. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself, then opened the folder. The first page made her blood run cold. It was a financial statement, not recent, dated from almost 2 years ago. At first glance, it looked harmless. Then she saw the account name attached to it, Grace Miller Morgan, unauthorized transfer summary. Her heart pounded harder. The document claimed that she had moved company funds, hundreds of thousands, into a private account. The kind of violation that could get a board chair removed instantly and potentially charged. But she had never done this. She flipped to the next page. There were emails forged, addressed from her corporate account. In them, Grace approved financial reallocations and authorized access to accounts she didn't even know existed. The timestamps matched nights when Caleb claimed she was too emotional to attend corporate events. Times she had been alone in the penthouse while he was working late. Then the next page cut deeper. It wasn't financial. It was personal. A printed report stating that Grace had been admitted to a private clinic 4 years earlier for psychological instability, signed by a doctor she had never heard of. Caleb's name appeared in the witness section, claiming she was prone to breakdowns and required observation. Grace's breath caught in her throat. He hadn't just prepared for a divorce. He had prepared to erase her credibility entirely. Elias stepped into the office quietly, noticing the way her hands shook. "Grace?" She handed him the folder. He scanned the pages and his jaw clenched hard enough to turn the muscles in his face rigid. "This is fabricated. All of it. And never done." "I know," Grace whispered. "But Victor thinks the board won't." Elias closed the folder with controlled fury. "Caleb pre-built this. He created a paper trail to make you look unstable and dishonest. So, if you ever tried to leave him, he'd have leverage." The realization tore through her. Caleb hadn't just betrayed her marriage. He'd tried to make sure she could never stand without him. Grace's voice cracked. "He wanted everyone to think I was incompetent. It's not ominous." Elias's eyes softened, but his voice stayed strong. "This isn't about incompetence. This is about control. Abusers rewrite reality so they never lose power, and Caleb, for all his arrogance, is predictable." Grace closed her eyes, fighting the tremor in her chest. "Victor said the board would turn on me." Elias shook his head. "Not if we get ahead of it. Not if we expose the fraud before Victor weaponizes it." "Thanks for watching." Grace lowered herself into her chair, feeling the weight of every lie Caleb had planted. Years of second-guessing herself suddenly made sense. The times he said she was forgetful. The nights he told her she was too stressed. The arguments he reframed as her overreacting. None of it was accidental. Elias knelt beside her. "Grace, listen to me. These documents can destroy you if you let them. But if we expose them first, show the truth and prove the fraud, they'll destroy Caleb and Victor." Grace wiped her eyes, not from weakness, from anger. "I won't let him bury me again," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Then we fight." Grace straightened in her chair, resolve hardening like steel. Victor thought he was holding a weapon. Caleb thought he had built a trap, but Grace had something neither man understood: the truth and the courage to use it. She stood, grabbing the folder with new strength. "We expose everything. All of Caleb's lies, all of Victor's deals, and we do it before sunrise." Elias smiled faintly. "Then we better start now." But just as they turned toward the door, Grace's phone buzzed again. A new message. This one wasn't a threat. It was a video. A video of Caleb in a meeting with Victor planning something far darker than financial fraud. Grace's breath froze because the secret wasn't just about money. It was a plan that put her and her baby in real danger. Grace didn't breathe for several seconds as the video loaded. The screen illuminated her face with a cold, bluish glow. Elias stepped closer, his jaw tightening as the audio crackled to life. Caleb's voice came first. "She won't see it coming. She never does." Grace's stomach dropped. Victor replied, tone smooth, predatory. "She's too timid to question anything. Just keep her distracted, and when the time comes, we'll move forward. She won't be a problem." The camera angle was grainy, but clear enough to show the two men sitting across from each other in a dim, upscale lounge, leather chairs, amber lighting, a bottle of aged whiskey between them. Caleb leaned in, agitated, desperate. "What about after?" Caleb asked. "Once everything is transferred?" Victor smirked. "Once the process is complete, she'll have no role in Morgan Tech. We'll make sure of that. If she pushes back, well, stress isn't good for someone in her condition." Grace clutched her stomach instinctively. Elias swore under his breath. "They were planning this while you were pregnant. This wasn't business. This was deliberate harm." The video continued. Caleb rubbed his forehead. "She's getting suspicious. She asked about the travel receipts." Victor waved dismissively. "Women like her break easily. You just need to keep telling her she's overreacting. Make her doubt herself. It's worked this long, hasn't it?" Caleb let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah, she always thinks she's the problem." Grace's eyes stung, but not with sadness this time, with fury. The video quality shifted as someone walked past the hidden camera. When the view steadied again, Victor slid a manila envelope across the table. "In here," Victor said, "are the falsified psych evaluations, the financial transfers, the drafts you'll sign on her behalf. If she ever steps out of line or tries to leave, you use this to shut her down. The board won't trust a woman painted as unstable." Caleb hesitated. "And if she doesn't back down?" Victor leaned forward. "Then she loses everything. And the baby complicates things, so take advantage of that." Grace covered her mouth, horrified. Caleb didn't flinch. "You're right. She won't see it coming." Victor smiled coldly. "Good. Now drink." This empire will be ours soon. The video ended abruptly. Silence swallowed the room. Grace felt like her heart was being squeezed in a fist. Not because of Caleb, she had already stopped loving him, but because she realized just how completely he had planned to erase her identity, her stability, her sanity, all while she carried his child. Elias finally spoke, voice low. This isn't corporate fraud anymore. This is conspiracy, coercion, psychological manipulation. And depending on how far they intended to go, he paused, possibly endangerment. Grace wiped her eyes. He was never planning to let me leave, not with the baby, not with my dignity. Elias placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Grace, this video is powerful evidence. It turns the entire situation. You're not fighting shadows anymore. You're fighting criminals. Her breath steadied. We need to take this to the board. Yes, but we must do it carefully. Victor will retaliate if he senses a threat. Grace closed the folder, her fingers trembling but determined. He already sees me as a threat. There's no going back. As they moved toward the door, she felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not doubt, but resolve sharper than steel. Caleb tried to break her. Victor tried to silence her, but instead they awakened something they never expected. A woman who refused to be erased. Grace stepped out of her office, her voice steady. We exposed them at the board meeting first thing in the morning. But as she and Elias approached the elevator, her phone buzzed once more. Another message. This time it was a photo of her penthouse. Lights on door slightly open and a single line beneath it. You're running out of time. Grace's breath hitched because the war Victor promised had just arrived at her front door. Grace stared at the photo on her phone, her pulse slamming in her ears. The penthouse she once called home glowed under soft ambient lights she hadn't left on. The door in the picture was cracked open just enough to suggest someone had entered or was waiting inside. Elias stepped closer, reading the message over her shoulder. His expression shifted instantly, sharpening with protective urgency. Grace, you can't go back there. She shook her head. My things are there, important documents, and she placed a trembling hand on her belly. I can't let anyone near us. Elias exhaled, steadying himself. Then you're not going alone. I'm coming with you. They left the office through the private elevator, stepping into the cold Manhattan night. Snow drifted slowly, muting the city's noise, wrapping everything in a deceptive calm. A black SUV waited at the curb, one of the company vehicles. Elias opened the door for her, scanning the street with the vigilance of someone who understood exactly how far men like Victor Hale could go. As they drove toward the penthouse, Grace's mind raced. Caleb's betrayal had cut deeply, but Victor's threat, cold, calculated, unrestrained, was different. Caleb wanted control. Victor wanted annihilation. Grace, Elias said softly, careful not to overwhelm her. If Victor sent that message, he's escalating. He wants you scared, and he wants you unstable before tomorrow's board meeting. Grace nodded, gripping the seatbelt. He doesn't know me. Elias looked at her, a small but fierce respect in his eyes. No, he doesn't. They arrived at the building. Grace's breath fogged in the cold as she stepped out of the car. The lobby attendant jolted upright when he saw her. Mrs. Miller, Chairwoman, I didn't expect you tonight. Grace forced a smile. Everything all right in the building? He hesitated. There was a man asking about you an hour ago. Grace felt her stomach drop. Did he give a name? No, just said he had personal business with you. I told him you weren't home. He left. Elias's jaw tightened. Let's get upstairs. The elevator ride felt impossibly slow. The higher they rose, the heavier Grace's breathing became. When the doors finally parted on the penthouse floor, a cold dread drifted into her chest. The hallway was silent, too silent. Elias motioned for her to stay back. He pushed gently on the penthouse door. It swung open without resistance. Grace clutched her belly, fighting the urge to panic. They stepped inside. The lights were on. A glass of water sat on the counter. Her coat had been moved from the closet to the arm of the sofa. Someone had been there, maybe still was. Stay behind me, Elias whispered, navigating the room with slow, deliberate steps. Grace didn't speak. Her throat was tight, her hands cold. She looked around. Nothing was broken, nothing stolen. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message, a violation, a warning. Elias checked the hallway, the kitchen, the bedroom. Nothing. But when he stepped into Caleb's old office, he froze. Grace, he said, voice low but urgent. You need to see this. She walked in and the world tilted. Papers were scattered across the desk. Not Caleb's documents, hers. Copies of her medical records, photos of her walking into Morgan Tech, even a close-up picture of her ultrasound. A single message was written across the top page in red ink. Everything you love becomes leverage. Grace felt her knees weaken. Elias steadied her, fury blazing in his eyes. This is Hale. He's pushing psychological warfare. He wants you shaken before tomorrow. Grace wiped her face. But this time, the tears weren't fear. They were rage. He thinks this will make me back down. AD. Elias shook his head. He's wrong. Grace straightened, spine tightening like steel. We go to the board tomorrow. We expose everything. They want war? We meet them on the battlefield. But just as she turned toward the door, her phone buzzed again. One message, a location, and a time. Midnight. Come alone, or the next threat won't be a warning. Grace's breath caught because Hale wasn't finished and now he wanted a face-to-face confrontation. The clock on Grace's phone struck 11:42 p.m. As she stepped out of the SUV and onto the dimly lit pier. The East River churned quietly below, reflecting the glow of the Manhattan skyline. The location Victor had sent felt deliberate, isolated, industrial, far from witnesses, the kind of place where corporate threats could turn into something far darker. Elias had begged her not to come alone. But she hadn't. He waited in the SUV, hidden in the shadows, watching every move. Grace tightened her coat around her belly as icy winds sliced through the air. She walked toward the end of the pier, lights flickering overhead like dying stars. And there he was, Victor Hale, standing with the calm posture of a man who believed he owned every part of this city. He turned before she reached him, a cold smile pulling at his lips. Grace Miller, he said smoothly. You're punctual. That's a rare trait these days. She kept her voice steady. You said it was urgent. End quote. It is. Victor clasped his hands behind his back. I thought we should have a civilized conversation before tomorrow's board meeting. You know, establish terms. There are no terms, Grace replied. I'm not stepping down, Victor chuckled. Everyone steps down eventually. The difference is whether they step down alive or professionally dead. Grace felt the chill of his words, but she didn't let him see her fear. You broke into my home. If you would bed Russian. I entered a home whose owner has no power to keep me out, Victor corrected calmly. When Caleb gave me keys, he assumed you'd never have the spine to use that charter clause. Caleb is finished, Grace said. And you know it. Victor stepped closer, too close, his presence icy, invasive. Caleb was a pawn, a foolish, emotional man. I never put faith in him. But you? He tilted his head. You're becoming a problem. Grace didn't step back. You can threaten me. You can scare me. But tomorrow morning I'll expose everything. The video, the forged documents, the entire conspiracy. Victor's eyes hardened. You think the board will believe you? A pregnant woman with a history of psychological instability? That report was fake, Grace snapped. Fake, Victor admitted, but effective. Grace's shook, but she didn't break. You underestimate me the same way Caleb did. And look where that got him. Victor's jaw twitched. Be careful, Grace. You're playing a game built for men with sharper teeth. Grace met his stare. I'm not playing a game. I'm telling the truth, and the truth will bury both of you. Victor's expression cooled into something deadly. You still believe truth matters in a room full of men like me. He stepped closer, his voice a quiet knife. But truth is nothing without power. And I have the power now, Grace replied. For the first time, Victor's mask cracked a flicker of annoyance, maybe even concern. Before either of them spoke again, a sudden metallic clatter came from behind a shipping container. Victor's head snapped in the direction of the sound. Grace tensed, instinctively stepping back, protective hand on her belly. A shadow moved, fast, deliberate. Then a figure emerged. Not Victor's man, Caleb. His hair was a mess, eyes wild, breath visible in frantic bursts. He looked nothing like the polished CEO from the plaza. He was unraveling, desperate, furious, cornered. Grace, he spat, voice shaking. You ruined my life. Victor's face twisted with irritation. I told you not to come here. Caleb ignored him, stumbling closer. You took everything from me, everything. Grace's heart thudded painfully. Caleb, Stop. But Caleb didn't stop. He reached into his coat. Elias burst from the SUV, shouting her name. Grace's breath froze in her chest as Caleb yanked something from his jacket. A glint of metal under the pier lights. Grace stumbled back because her husband wasn't just angry, he was armed. For a split second, the world froze. Snow drifted lazily through the air. The East River churned quietly below, and the cold metallic glint in Caleb's hand caught the reflection of the pier lights like a warning from fate itself. "Caleb," Grace whispered, stepping back instinctively, one hand over her belly. "Put it down." But Caleb was beyond reason. His hair was disheveled, his tie crooked, his eyes burning with the wild desperation of a man who had run out of lies, out of power, out of places to hide. "You ruined me," he spat. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Everything I built, everything I was, everything you destroyed." Grace corrected, voice trembling but steady. Elias sprinted behind her, positioning himself slightly forward, shielding her. "Caleb, don't do this. You're making things worse." Elias dodged. Victor stood a few feet away, expression tight with annoyance rather than concern. "This wasn't part of the plan," he muttered. Caleb ignored him, eyes fixed on Grace. "You were supposed to stay quiet, stay small. You were supposed to need me." Grace swallowed hard, fear mixing with heartbreak. "I did need you, and you used that against me." Caleb trembled, raising the object fully into view. But it wasn't a gun, it was a flash drive. Elias blinked. "What?" Caleb's laugh cracked in the cold air. "This has everything. The accounts Victor set up, the deals he hid, the money he laundered. He thinks I don't keep backup files? Of course I do. I'm not stupid." Victor's expression turned lethal. Caleb stepped closer to Grace, voice hoarse. "I was going to use this to take back control, expose him, force the board to choose me. But you," he pointed at her, shaking, "you stole my company." Grace inhaled sharply. "Caleb, give it to me. We can fix this, but not like this." But Caleb's face twisted with something darker than anger, humiliation. "You don't get to fix anything anymore." Suddenly, Victor lunged. "Give it to me," Victor growled, grabbing Caleb's arm. The two men fought, slamming into a railing, the flash drive nearly slipping from Caleb's hand. Caleb shoved him back, shouting, "I'm not your puppet anymore." Grace reached forward instinctively. "Stop, both of you." But it was too late. Victor struck Caleb across the face, sending the flash drive flying. Time slowed. The small metal device spun through the air, bounced once on the pier, then slid toward the edge. Grace gasped. Elias lunged. Caleb screamed. "No." Victor cursed under his breath. The flash drive teetered, hung on the edge, then dropped, straight into the East River. Caleb collapsed to his knees in horror. "No, no, no." Victor straightened, cold fury radiating from him. "I told you not to act on your own," he said, voice like ice. "You incompetent fool." Caleb lifted his head, rage and despair twisting his features. "You ruined me, and you ruined yourself." Victor stepped closer, voice deadly calm. "But now you're useless to me." He turned to leave. "That's it?" Grace demanded. "You think you can walk away after threatening me? After breaking into my home?" Victor paused, glancing over his shoulder with a smirk. "Grace, you don't have evidence, and without evidence, I don't lose." Elias stepped forward. "You forgot something." Victor raised a brow. "What?" Elias nodded toward the shipping container behind them. "That?" Victor turned and froze. Two NYPD officers stepped out from behind the container, then two more, then a federal agent, all with cameras, all witnessing everything. Grace's voice was steady. "You really thought I'd come here alone?" Victor's smirk vanished. Caleb staggered backward, pale as ash. The agent approached. "Victor Hale, Caleb Morgan, you are both under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, attempted coercion, and endangerment." Grace took a breath. Not shaky, not afraid, free, because the truth did matter when you brought the right people to hear it. Caleb looked at her one last time, eyes full of the realization that everything he had left was slipping away for good. Victor glared venomous. "This isn't over, Grace." Grace met his stare with calm finality. "It is, if we Texas won, if we Texans sport." But as the officers cuffed them, Caleb shouted over his shoulder, "You think you've won? Wait until you see what comes out tomorrow." Grace froze, because Caleb wasn't talking about Victor's crimes. He was talking about something else entirely. The morning sun rose over Manhattan with a soft gold that felt almost symbolic, like the city itself was ready to witness the end of a long, brutal storm. Grace sat in the back of the town car as it approached Morgan Tech headquarters, her hand resting protectively over her belly. There was no fear in her breathing now. No trembling, no doubt, only calm, only truth. Elias walked beside her into the building, his presence steady, grounding. "Are you ready?" he asked. Grace nodded. More than ever. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric. Every member was present, murmuring anxiously about the overnight arrests, the pier incident, and the rumors beginning to circulate through the financial world. When Grace entered, the room fell completely silent. Harold Kingston cleared his throat. "Grace, we've received reports that Caleb and Victor were detained. Federal agents confirmed the charges, but Caleb claims he left something scheduled to go public this morning. Do you know what he meant?" Grace sat at the head of the table, her seat now, and opened her laptop. "Yes, and it won't work." She connected to the large display. A screen appeared called Evidence Drop 9 a.m. It was 8:59. The room held its breath. At 9 sharp, the file attempted to launch. A video, fabricated emails, faked medical reports, financial transfers Caleb had forged in her name. But instead of playing, a large red banner replaced the files. "This content has been flagged and seized by federal authorities. Case number 44715B. Fraud evidence under investigation." Gasps filled the room. Grace looked up, steady. "Agents seized the files last night after Victor's arrest. They confirmed the entire packet was falsified. Caleb intended to release it this morning to destroy my credibility." She paused, but he failed. Board members exchanged relieved looks. Some even looked ashamed for doubting her. Harold leaned forward. "Grace, your husband didn't just betray you. He betrayed all of us. It's clear now." His voice softened. "And it's equally clear you saved this company." The room murmured in agreement. Grace breathed slowly, her heart warming with something she hadn't felt in months: safety. She stood. "Before we begin our agenda, I want to say only this. No empire is worth building unless it's built with integrity. Today, Morgan Tech moves forward on solid ground." Applause broke out, sincere, grateful, unanimous. By the time she exited the building, reporters waited outside. Cameras flashed, microphones reached toward her. But Grace didn't shrink. She didn't hide. "Chairwoman Miller," one called, "do you have a statement on your husband's arrest?" Grace paused. For once, her story didn't hurt. "I wish him healing," she said honestly, "but accountability was long overdue." "Due office?" another reporter asked. "What's next for you?" Grace smiled gently. "A future I'm finally proud of." Elias opened the car door for her, and she turned to him. "Thank you for everything." He shook his head lightly. "You did this, Grace, not me." Their eyes held warm, respectful, hopeful in a way that didn't rush anything. Grace wasn't ready for love yet, but she was ready for possibility, and that was enough. Back at her penthouse, now protected, secured, and finally hers, she stood by the window overlooking Central Park. Snow fell in slow, peaceful drifts. She placed both hands over her belly. "We're safe now," she whispered. Grace rested one hand over her belly as her baby kicked gently beneath her palm, a small, steady reminder that the future was already moving forward. She had survived betrayal, public humiliation, and the collapse of a marriage she once believed would last forever. She had reclaimed the company she helped build, exposed the corruption hidden behind Caleb's success, and taken back control of her own life. But her greatest victory was not defeating him. It was becoming the woman fear could no longer control. Grace closed her eyes and allowed the silence to settle around her. For the first time in years, there was no argument waiting, no lie to uncover, and no one demanding that she become smaller to protect their pride. The storm was finally over. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle is the way." Grace had never chosen the pain placed before her, but she chose what it would create. She chose truth instead of silence, dignity instead of revenge, and courage instead of surrender. Caleb believed betraying her would remove her from his future. Instead, it removed him from hers. Grace opened her eyes and looked toward the horizon. Her company was secure. Her child was protected, and the life ahead belonged entirely to her. She had not merely survived. She had risen.